It is an especial honor for me to introduce our next guest because I grew up a mile from the Michigan football stadium, and I have seen my home state go through some tough times in the past several decades, including an economic meltdown. But today, Michigan is coming back, and at the top of any list of people who are responsible for that turnaround, I guess I would put two people: the President of the United States and our next speaker, former Governor Jennifer Granholm. She has really been a remarkable political leader. She was Attorney General of the state of Michigan. As governor, she worked tirelessly to promote the Michigan economy, to diversify, including into clean energy, bringing almost 90,000 clean energy jobs into the state of Michigan. She's currently teaching at Berkeley and a commentator on Politica. We're delighted to have her here. Governor Granholm. Thank you.
All right. First of all, thank you to the Department of Energy for hosting today and these great speakers that are lined up, including you, Secretary Chu. Thank you for sharing your vision and the opportunities in the private sector. I'm obsessed, as the former governor of Michigan, with what opportunities are for job creation in the private sector. So with all due respect to the scientists here, and I know there are a lot of scientists, right, at least at the department, I am a scientist too, a political scientist. My laboratory is the laboratory of democracy that is Michigan. And I want to share with you some data from my lab. And part of my lab has been dealing with, I call it here, 3 problems, 1 proposal, dealing with problem number 1, which is job losses. In my lab, when I was first elected as governor, I got a call, and I was elected in 2002, took office in 2003, and in my first year, I knew that we were going to start having a big problem because I got a call from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is our agency that does economic development, and the vice president said, "Governor, we got a problem." And I said, "What?" He said, "There is a little tiny town of Greenville, Michigan, in the center of the state that has 8,000 people living in it, but inside of Greenville is a refrigerator factory owned by Electrolux that is about to shut down and move to Mexico." And I said, "Well, how many people work at Electrolux in this town of 8,000? 2,700 people. So as you can imagine, this is a one-industry town. In fact, the town grew up around making refrigerators. They proudly called themselves the refrigerator capital of North America, little Greenville. And so I said to the Economic Development Agency, well, we'll just make them an offer they can't refuse so we can keep the jobs here. So we went to Greenville. I brought my whole cabinet with me, and we put everything we could on the table to offer to the folks at Electrolux a means for them to stay. In fact, we were in a big room, not quite this big, but we were there with the leaders of Greenville, the mayor, the city manager, the head of the community college, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, the head of the UAW who represented the workers. We said, what could we put on the table? How big could our pile of chips be to make the case for them to stay? And so we all put stuff on. We made a huge pile of chips. We emptied out our pockets. We slid the pile of chips across the table to the management of Electrolux. And in the pile was 0 taxes, local and state, for 20 years. We would help to build them a new factory. The UAW offered unprecedented concessions so that they could keep their jobs there. The management of Electrolux took this pile of incentives, or took a list of incentives, went outside the room for 17 minutes, came back in and said, wow, we have never seen this generous of an offer before. But there's nothing you can do to compensate for the fact that we can pay $1.57 an hour in Juarez, Mexico. So we're going. And Greenville saw the implosion of the factory, saw the workers leaving, and saw, via the internet, a new factory that was built in Juarez, Mexico. On the month that the last refrigerator rolled off the assembly line, the employees of Electrolux in Greenville had a gathering that they called the Last Supper. It was at a big community pavilion, and I went to it because I just couldn't believe that a governor could do nothing to keep jobs in her state. And I went into this Clackles Orchard Pavilion, and there were hundreds of people sitting at 8 top round tables, eating out of box lunches. There was a sad band playing, or a band playing sad songs, probably both. And I went up to the first table, and a guy comes up to me with his 2 daughters, and he had a baseball cap on, he had tattoos. And he said, "Governor, I want you to meet my daughters." He said, "I'm 48 years old. I've worked at this factory for 30 years. My father worked at this factory. My grandfather worked at this factory. All I know is how to make refrigerators." And then he looked at his daughters, and he puts his hand on his chest, and he looked at me, and he said, "So, Governor, tell me, who is ever going to hire me?" That question was asked by so many people in that room that day, but it's not just Greenville. 50,000 factories closed in the first decade of this century. 50,000 communities felt like a nuclear bomb went off in their towns as people who had grown up around manufacturing felt the losses of these jobs. So, problem number 1 is job losses. Problem number 2, which the secretary just eloquently pointed out, is climate change. You all know about that. Problem number 3 is congressional gridlock. I'm all about what policy can we adopt that Congress will approve that will allow us to have national energy policy so that we can create enough jobs in America, enough demand in America, so that the guy in Greenville and people like him all across the country can have employment. Now, congressional gridlock is not new. In fact, there was a poll out, some of you may have seen it this week, which says that the gridlock is so bad that congressional approval rating is now below lice, cockroaches, root canals, France, Donald Trump, and Nickelback. Oh my God. But the good news is that it's better than meth labs and gonorrhea. We got something to work with. So let me ask you, what can we do about this? I feel like this. I'm sure that a lot of you in this department feel this way as well. What policy that the Obama administration has adopted has been pushed through all of the states in the country, almost all of the states? What policy has been the most effective at driving change at the state level? Anybody? Come on, you smart people.
Recovery Act.
What?
The American
Recovery Act is good, but not voluntarily. Voluntary changes across the state.
Appliance efficiency.
The one I'm thinking of is the race to the top on education. 48 states. Democrats, Republican governors love that. Why? Because they put out a bucket of money, $4.5 billion, and they said compete for it, states. And the price of entry for that was that all states had to raise their educational standards. And I can tell you as governor, this was heretofore unthought of because of local control and the local school boards. You couldn't get that policy change through. But that money allowed me to go to the legislature and say, we are so hungry for money. If we make these changes and raise the standards, we can compete. My modest proposal is that we do the same thing for clean energy jobs. Challenge the states. You all have done this great Sunshot Challenge, which is a race to the top for sun. You're doing something similar in grid, right? And buildings. Let's do it big. Let's get a $4.5 billion pot. Now, I have an idea about that. And let's challenge the states. Let me just give you the, from our perspective, in the state levels, the governors love it when they get to have some say and when they are respected, Democrats and Republicans. It's opt-in, although frankly, if you have a pot of money, they'll all opt in because governors love to stand in front of job creation and cut the ribbon, right? And tell their people that they brought these jobs to the state. Republican and Democratic governors will love it. It busts through a lot of the permitting issues. If you can challenge the states to streamline the permitting and take care of the NIMBY problems, get the bureaucracy out, so that you can get the installation of solar and of wind down, challenge the states to do it, and it fosters innovation at the state level. Let me just give you an idea of what this might look like. For example, you have a funding pot that's the same level, no more, no less, than the race to the top for for education. The price of entry for the states to compete for this pot of money would be to have a state clean energy standard that is similar to the president's, 80% by 2035. So you can't get a CES through this Congress, but you might be able to incentivize 50 states to do it. And if you say you can enter, if you adopt a state CES, broadly defined, like the president is saying, including natural gas, including nuclear, including clean coal, and of course, including renewables. And then the states receive bonus points if they do the following. If the states, as you, DOE, of course, DOE would administer this and evaluate it and all that. This would be in your ballpark. If the states, for example, did an analysis of their own economy, a SWOT analysis, doing their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, they checked out their geography and their incumbent industry clusters, and they partnered with the private sector to say, these are the clusters that we think our state can compete in, not just in the country, but in the globe. So, for example, Idaho might say, I'm going to be the place that pioneers geothermal. Or Oregon, I think you guys were saying to me back there. Or the Sun Belt states say, we're going to be the place where solar power is not just produced, but the panels are produced. And the intellectual breakthroughs happen. In fact, in Michigan, we did this with batteries when the Recovery Act happened and we were allowed to compete. We did a SWOT analysis on Michigan's economy, said, well, okay, we built car 1.0. We want to be the place where car 2.0 is built, and we want to be the place where the lithium-ion battery happens. So as a result of the opportunity at the federal level and partnering with the private sector, we were able to attract 17 battery companies or their suppliers to Michigan to create at that point, up to 20,000 jobs by the year 2020. Now, that industry cluster provides an opportunity for our state. Other states could compete for that too. But every state has something to offer in this clean energy realm. Every state has some unique asset that they can put forth. The southeast of the country, which often don't have renewable portfolio standards at all, they got a lot of biomass. Let them be the place where there's breakthroughs in biofuels or in the use, or cellulosic ethanol. There are huge opportunities everywhere in the country. The Northeast, they could be the pioneers of energy efficiency solutions or of creating clean energy financing. The offshore states with a good offshore, they can be the pioneers in that. Bottom line is every state can do this if they did an analysis and created industry clusters and partnered and leveraged their business relationships inside of those states. If they created a cluster that had the universities buy in and the business community buy in, now you're talking. Now you're cooking with gas, as we would say. And that the state creates both supply and demand side strategies. So obviously having a clean energy standard is a demand side strategy, but in addition to that, what if a state wanted to adopt a feed-in tariff? What if that was good for the state? What if the state had a fleet purchase strategy to be able to boost demand for those products? The supply side strategies like tax credits and loans, et cetera, that's all very important too, but what we really need are demand side strategies as well. And the states can do that. The state's developing regional partnerships with not just inside the state, but with other states. So if the Sun Belt states came into the department and said, we've got a regional strategy to be the area of the country that is producing solar panels and solar power, they get a kicker for that. I'm all about this last one. The states would get a kicker for consideration when they came in and said, this strategy is going to create jobs. The more jobs created, good jobs created, the more likelihood you have of winning the competition. Job creation and the hollowing out of the middle class go hand in hand. The lack of job creation, the loss of these manufacturing jobs has caused the structural changes in our nation's economy that has resulted in the hollowing out of the middle class. We have an obligation to fix that problem somehow and not just be bystanders to the loss of these jobs. Right now, hands off, you say anything about policy that creates jobs in the US and people get their pants in a knot. Truly, we have an obligation as a nation. We have a critical national need to have energy independence. We also have a critical national need to create a good middle class. How to pay for the $4.5 billion? This is just me brainstorming by myself. So danger, danger, Will Robinson. But I do think that if you can go to the extent that you can either adopt a proposal that Congress has put out there for other purposes or get the philanthropic and foundation community to buy in, the better off you are. So for example, if you got Google and the Gates Foundation to challenge Congress to say, we'll put $2 billion on the table if you add another $2.5 billion to get that pot to $4.5 billion. Now, of course, Secretary has just talked about the $150 billion a year that we're already spending in cleanup for, for climate-related events. Just a little slice is all I'm talking that would generate massive change across the country in these states where governors like me would bend over backwards to have access to it. But foundations are one way to challenge Congress. The second is an idea that a lot of people have talked about, which is that there's a bunch of multinational corporations that have got a lot of offshore profits parked offshore. And the question is, they won't bring those profits back because the corporate tax rate's at 35%. But if you did a one-time lowering of the corporate tax rate to 15%, 10%, and you took the taxes that were paid by those companies and used them to capitalize a clean energy jobs bank, or a lot of people have talked about an infrastructure bank that you could broadly define, you could take a slice of that to catalyze change all the way across the country. That is something that Republicans have been advocating for, the business community has been advocating for. They don't care so much what you do with the tax dollars that come in. What they care about is that they have a lower tax rate so they can bring some of that money home. I know these are only 15 minutes, and I appreciate the chance for doing this. I'm sure I'm over. But we all talk about the distributed generation of energy. And I just ask us to think about using the states to have the distributed generation of energy policy throughout the country. Because you could see enormous change if you allowed the governors to champion this. The governors would love it. If Chris Christie can get $60 billion for Sandy relief, you better believe all these governors with access to businesses who would like to see this happen can help drive this change. So folks, it doesn't have to be like this. It could be like this. Thank you.